welcome back. The List Lab, episode 2, we've made it this far. MMU Daughters of Khaine. The acronyms are strong in this one. So Daughters of Khaine, the scourge of AOS 1. I'd say probably that the Slaughter Troop Hagnar build was maybe the Ascendant build in Age of Sigmar for 18 months, which probably makes it the longest lasting top table build. I know Change Host has come and gone and come again. I know Vanguard Wing was probably too strong for about 6 months too long. And Seraphon obviously are riding out probably 9 months as the top dog at the moment. But I think in the next fortnight we'll have the new Lumineth book, and we might see their ascendancy end. And for a significant portion of that 9 or 10 months, there hasn't necessarily been a lot of play on the table. So I think a lot of people have still got a rude shock awaiting them when they play the Dracoths, or when they play the Fangs of Sotek for the first time at an event on the table, and they're mortal wounded off by the end of their turn 2. But we'll leave that to them to enjoy. So if I'd recorded this show last week instead of the Slanesh show, I think I would be talking about how well internally balanced the book is, and how through the Broken Realms Marathi book we saw a revitalized, a modernized Marathi scroll, which was clearly their most powerful piece in the book, to the extent that you wouldn't look at a loadout built around cauldrons and hags. That was then subsequently addressed when the Daughters of Khaine book dropped. We had incredibly cheap towers, so the Bloodrack Shrine and the two avatars on cauldrons, and we had these hags who were able to chant 3, 4, 5, 7 in some cases prayers per turn, and they provided us with a legitimate alternate option to Marathi. Now, the FAQ sadly has come out in this past week. This is probably the saddest I've been since Uncle Iroh sung that song, Leaves from the Vine in Avatar. That really got me.
If only I could have helped you. Leaves from the vine, falling so slow, like fragile, tiny shells drifting in the foam. Little soldier boy, come marching home. Brave soldier boy comes marching home.
So the change is really simple. You can only chant one prayer per turn, and what that means is that builds that were centered around pieces like the Avatar on Foot, which is an excellent unit in this book, builds that were centered around the triple towers, that they are no longer viable in my mind, to the extent that it's not a safe build for you to both be able to get your buffs up on your units and also turn your avatars on for that early turn output that you're going to need from them if you're investing in multiple avatars, whether they're on foot or mounted. So I had actually bought 3 towers on release. Why do I do this? I bought 3 cauldrons. I bought 2 of them from a mate who's leaving the hobby. Shout out to Lockie. He'll never listen to this. He and his partner, I think they've bought a small brown pig, and they're going to spend their spare time truffle farming. So all the best with your endeavors, guys. So I bought the 3 towers. I'd named them for the 3 pillars of evil. I had all these lists in my saved as screenshots in my phone, which I've subsequently deleted. So we had Barad-dûr, we had Orthanc, the final pillar of evil, contemporary capitalist ideals, but they're all gone by the wayside now. I could talk about this FAQ for literally an hour. I don't think that's going to necessarily add anything to the conversation that hasn't already been said elsewhere. So I just redirect anyone that's interested to go super deep on this, to go and listen to the Honest Wargamers deep dive that they did when the FAQ dropped. So he had Benjamin Saver on. Benjamin basically has been my daughter's Padawan since the first book dropped. He's taken a lot of learnings from me, which is good of him, and he looks exactly like Grigory Rasputin right now, so definitely worth a watch. All right, let's just jump into it this week. Allegiance, Daughters of Khaine, Temple, Keltnar. So, notwithstanding what I've just said about Marathi, she clearly is the best piece in the book. And if you're wanting to go 5-0 at a tournament, I would encourage you to take her as the first unit and then build 1,400 points around her accordingly. But we're still going to have a crack at trying to get a viable army on the table that doesn't include Marathi and that looks in different directions. So, let's run through the list top to bottom. We might fill some of that white space. There we go. All right, so we've got a Hag Queen on a Cauldron of Blood. She's our general. She's got the command trait Circling Flock. She's got the artifact that you have to take from the sub-allegiance. She's got the prayer Catechism of Murder. So I'll go through all of this in more detail later. I'll just read top to bottom to start with. We've then got a Slaughter Queen. She's got the Martyr Sacrifice, a Bloodrack Medusa with the Shadow Stone, and she's got the spell Steed of Shadows, and we've brought in a Battle Mage from the Cities of Sigmar book, and they're from the Realm of Light, Haish. So that rounds out the characters. We've then got 20 Witch Elves, 20 Sisters of Slaughter. All 60 of those have blade bucklers, so we're certainly leaning into something there, and we'll talk in more detail about that shortly. I've then taken 2 units of 18 Khainite Shadow Stalkers, 2 units of 5 Life Takers, and a unit of 10 Shadow Warriors. So that rounds out the units. There's a significant portion of that. So the Hag Queen on Cauldron, 2 times 20 Witch Elves, and the 2 times 5 Life Takers are all in the battalion, the Cauldron Guard. And that brings us to 1,960 points. We're putting in a 40-point bid for a triumph, and we've got 145 wounds, which is really significant when you consider just how elite those bodies are. They're valuable wounds. This isn't a destruction army with 200 wounds of dross. This is actually really competent on the table bodies. Okay, in the first instance, let's just break down what we're getting from Keltnar, because it's really important. With Daughters of Khaine, they have a number of viable temples. Historically, we had Hagnar as our ascendant temple, and I think there's very little debate throughout Age of Sigmar 1, and up until very recently when the Marathi book dropped. If you're wanting to win events with Daughters of Khaine, I think you were temple locked to Hagnar. But in this book, we find ourselves in a very different situation where I think you can go Hagnar if you're wanting to run a hammer and anvil style army. You can go Drakey Ganeth if you're wanting to run an army which is able to, sort of stack buffs and then have quite a significant damage output. So if you want to try and go and destroy the world. And then Keltnar is really nice because the retreat and charge, which is the army-wide ability. And then we've got some other temples as well, which are also viable and worth looking at and having a think about. So we're getting that retreat and charge universally. I think retreat and charge is an incredibly powerful rule, and it's something that makes units like Bladegeist viable. It's something that other armies like poor Sylvaneth, they have to buy a battalion to make Dryads retreat and charge. So this is a really strong army-wide ability. Again, I don't want to harp on Marathi too much because she's an obvious power piece and her synergies and tech are pretty obvious, but obviously a monster like Marathi is susceptible to being caught in combats that she doesn't want to be in. So for instance, you might bubble wrap her with 30 zombies and she might waste a third of the game fighting her way through 30 zombies. That's a 180 point trade and the death player's off doing what they want elsewhere. In this army, she can go and fight those zombies, but then she can bounce over them in her turn, retreat, and then charge into the juicy characters at the back, which is what she does want to be killing to reduce your synergies and to reduce your power pairs. The command ability for this one is also fantastic. So what's it called? Bleed the Mind. Bleed the Mind basically means you choose a unit from Keltnar that's wholly within 12 of a hero, and until your next hero phase, any unmodified hits of 1 are going to result in mortal wounds to them. Amazing, because if you go first, you put this on a unit. There's no requirement that the unit's in combat either. So while the ability is used at the start of the combat phase, you don't actually need to be in combat. So you can do this very defensively in the early game. You could set up screens, and you could have this once to hit turn into mortal wounds for them, and then it becomes a question for your opponent of, do I want to go into that unit because there's going to be those bounce back mortals. And obviously the counter argument to this is, oh, well, everyone has access to a universal command ability, which is reroll once to hit. And that's true, but you can use this to fish. You can use this to get your opponent to waste command points because they're a finite resource and a really valuable resource. You can get them to waste command points rerolling their ones. Whereas for you, you're getting this the turn you put it on, and then in their subsequent turn, and then if they get the double again, you're getting it. So there's the possibility for this to be up for 3 consecutive turns, and if it works on the whole unit. So if they charge with multiple units, they've all of a sudden got this consideration. Do I want to use those reroll ones? Do I want to use those command points? Does it even matter? That sort of thing. So that's really interesting. The command trait is also brilliant. So the command trait, the circling flock, once per battle at the end of your movement phase, if your general's alive, you can summon a unit of Canary. So Canary include the Heart Renders, which are your shooting harpies that move after they shoot, or alternately the Life Takers, which have had a significant buff in this book and are a legitimate and viable option as the ones you bring down. Couple of things of note here. Your general needs to be alive, so you want your general to be a survivable piece. And the other thing is that it's any turn, it's not capped. So on the Heart Render scroll, I think they have to come down. Maybe it's by the end of the 3rd turn, could be the 4th. Either way, this can be some really late game summoning, and as the game progresses, the number of bodies on the board diminishes, so the value of 5 harpies actually increases relative to what else is around. The alternate take on that is you can go, you know what, I'm going to bring down 5 Heart Renders turn 1, and that means I have 25 free shots over the course of the game if they survive. So you can think of it from a volume perspective, how much shooting do I need in this game? Or you can think of it from a what late game swing do I need? And I love a unit of Canary Heart Renders in those scenarios where you need to hold all the objectives. So your opponent thinks that they're in a safe position, you drop them down, you take your 5 shots, you hit your 4+, you get to move them 6 inches. And on the 6-inch scenarios, often that will mean you're scoring. And then you get to charge as well. And where it's just a matter of bodies, because you've got run and charge and retreat and charge elsewhere in the army, you can actually swarm that objective in a scenario like Knife to the Heart, for instance, when they may not necessarily have seen that play was on for you. And that's always good, obviously. And then the final thing is that the Artifact of Power, it's dross. It purely is attacks. And in this army, we've chucked it on our general. Realistically, we could have thrown it on the Slaughter Queen. It doesn't matter. It's just 6s to hit explode. You don't have any weapons that you're desperate for 6s to hit to explode. Briefly, before the FAQ came out, your avatars on the shrine could be the ones that had this, at which time that would have been interesting. But they've now corrected that to say that the avatar on the shrine is actually a mount, so follows all of the standard rules for mounts around command abilities, command traits, and artifacts. All right. So let's sort of talk about the list and how it works. So really, this is an army that does nothing.
It's about nothing.
Right.
Everybody's doing something. We'll do nothing.
So we go into NBC, we tell them we got an idea for a show about nothing.
Exactly.
They say, what's your show about? I say nothing.
There you go.
So it doesn't do anything well, that is to say, but it does a whole heap of things. It privileges utility by having no play style. It actually can pivot and have sort of every play style. So there's opportunities there through the Battle Mage for us to be debuffing. So the Khainite Shadow Stalkers, they innately come with a -1 to hit. I'll pump up the Honest Wargamers ties again. So there's a really good episode of the Honest Wargamer where they go into great detail about all the different things you can do with the Khainite Shadow Stalkers. I'll include a link in the notes, but yeah, notwithstanding the narcissistic bore that he has as a co-host, that's a really good episode to check out. So the Shadow Stalkers, they can be -1 to hit natively. You can then chuck the -1 from the battle mage on, and then that unit can subsequently teleport, and they can string out in a line that's like 40 inches long. So -2 to hit, 40-inch line covering most of the table, and then they could potentially have other debuffs on them, so the Martyr Sacrifice, for instance, and those sort of things. So that's a legitimate way of playing, setting up lines. So you've got the 18 Shadow Stalkers, then maybe 6 to 9 inches behind that, another 18 Shadow Stalkers, then 6 to 12 inches behind that, 20 Witch Elves. And all of a sudden there's this triple screen thing happening, and it's really difficult for your opponent to work their way towards any home objectives that you're holding, or matchup dependent, obviously. It's also got an opportunity to be focused around the buffs. So if you're able to get the Witch Brew up, and then you're able to get Catechism of Murder, innately Daughters of Khaine have this table where every turn additional buffs are coming on. So all of a sudden you're looking at, reroll ones to hit. All of a sudden you're looking at things like reroll ones to wound. All of that sort of stacks up, and you could have a little tanky unit like 20 Witch Elves, for instance, go in and have quite significant output in terms of the space, the volume that they're taking up. So 20 models on 25 mil bases, punching out 60 exploding attacks is actually pretty significant, again, depending on the matchup. So it's really fast. The ability for it to bounce around is important, and it's got a high number of bodies. So while the army doesn't do anything spectacular, it does a lot of things well, and in some instances that is actually better. Having that utility is better overall than putting all of your eggs in one basket, but being susceptible to rock, scissors, paper depending on the matchup. It scores really well, so we've got 5 units of 20 models, and it's not uncommon in Australia for a pack to look something like this. Focal points, 5 objectives that are relatively close together. Scorched Earth, 8 objectives spread across the table. The Blade's Edge, 6 objectives. Better Part of Valor, an absolutely awful scenario that needs to be dropped from all tournament packs. But Better Part of Valor, relatively prevalent, and you've got 60 scoring battle line bodies that can be protected really well by your 3 deep strikes and your 4 deep strikes if we include the free unit. Your 4 deep strikes, and then those Witch Elves and Sisters of Slaughter getting around, protecting your home objectives, potentially burning those opposing objectives. And this army is incredibly good at shifting objectives. Anything where the opponent's moving up to the middle of the table, and you can pick your fights, perfect. I think, just in terms of those deep strikes as well, there probably is an argument to be made to say that shooting snakes are better than Shadow Warriors. But what the Shadow Warriors are bringing us is 5 additional bodies, and they have a particular function in the list. They can score because they can pop up where they need to be, but they can also threaten low wound characters. So I'm thinking specifically, in the mirror, I'm thinking about things like Hags and Slaughter Queens, and I'm thinking about Seraphon, and I'm thinking about those skink characters, which are massive force multipliers, but are relatively easy for the Seraphon player to protect. So if you're close enough and your bow snakes are on the board, that the Seraphon player can pretty typically target and remove those. But if your Shadow Warriors are off the board, you can drop down. The turn you come down, you're looking to hit terrain. You're going to be on 2s to hit, which will drop back to 3s with Lookout Sir, 3s to wound, and then from your 10 shots, typically you're going to do 4.4 wounds, right? So you need a little bit of variance. You can hit that 5 mark, and some of the characters are only 4 wound characters anyway, some of those little support pieces. So you're a legitimate shot there of taking those out. And when you do that, it can stop things like the standard shoot from the Fangs of Sotek, or it can stop the buff to give them run and shoot, or whatever. Like there's a whole range of things that you start to remove, and that they start to need to generate some counterplay around. So I think probably universally bow snakes are better than Shadow Warriors, but when we start to think about what are the potential top table matchups that we may encounter, I think the Shadow Warriors in this style of list bring us what we're actually looking for. The list has a number of units. Well, the whole army can retreat and charge, but then a number of units that can run and charge, and then there's a couple of units that can teleport and charge. Those are all incredible abilities. Those are all incredibly strong, and coupling them and having them across so many units makes it really difficult for your opponent to pin you down, and it means you can threaten objectives that seem safe otherwise. So that to me is the benefit of this particular temple over, say, for instance, Hagnar, which early game is going to give you solid protection, or Drake Ganeth, which is going to give you a fair bit more kittiness, for lack of a real word. But I think, this is the Keltnar the retreat is just massive, and it will be underestimated, and it will lead to plays that your opponent hasn't seen, and it'll lead to you stealing victory from the clutches of defeat. The other thing I just wanted to mention, and this speaks to the book itself more so than my particular list, is spam versus internal balance. So my friend Luke wrote a great article on Warhammer Community on the MetaWatch. I think holistically, MetaWatch is a very bad series, but I think Luke's particular contribution, and some of the other contributions, to be fair, Luke's particular contribution was really interesting, where he sort of talked about finding the best unit in a book and then taking the maximum number that you can. And for me, that's more of that's more a reflection of poor internal balance within the book. So Morsar Guard are obviously the standout example. Morsar Guard are infinitely better than anything else in the book. I'll give Volturnus a quick shout out, and I'll give the Aspect of the Storm a quick shout out, because I think they're units 2 and 3, but I think there's a fair gulf then when you start to look at the defensive stuff in terms of winning games of Age of Sigmar. From a negative play experience, obviously the Shark and the Ishlayan Guard are bellissimo, but from just winning events, winning games, I think the Morsar Guard are clearly top dog. We're not presented with that same design error, I think, when we look at the Daughters book, because every single unit in this army has a legitimate thing to add, that they're all actually adding value in one way or another. All right, so there's one other play element that this particular list leans into, and that's there's the command ability, the Blade of Bucklers, and the Martyr Sacrifice. We create this dynamic, right, where our opponent is actually hurting themselves when they attack us. And again, it's all about creating decisions. How many decisions can you force your opponent to make? And the more decisions they make, the more likely they are to make errors, and then we can exploit those errors. That's how we're going to try and win the game with this army. So our command ability, it procs on ones. If they roll a 1 to hit, after they've done their attacks, they cop a mortal wound. So if a unit has 21 attacks, like let's say Mortek Guard, right? 21 attacks, 2 each, +1 for the champ. They're going to do 3.5 mortal wounds to themselves, just as a starting point. I mean, those guys hit on 3s, right? So 3.5 mortal wounds to themselves. Let's say they're fighting the Shadowstalkers. All of a sudden, they've done 3.5 mortal wounds to themselves, and only half of them have hit, and then half of them wound again. They're doing like 3.5 mortal wounds, and then they're doing like 3 wounds to you before saves, of which you have a save, which can be buffed by both terrain and the cauldron, so the save can be pretty durable. And then your army wide, you have an after save. So like the Daughters of Khaine, it just is all about stacking all of these little things. On the surface, the scroll looks like, I've got a 5-up save, and that's really it. But then realistically, it can be like, I've actually got a 3-up save and a 6-up after save, which is obviously significantly better. So we've got the command abilities, procking on 1s. Fantastic. We've then got Blade Bucklers. So the Blade Bucklers come on our Sisters of Slaughter, our Witch Elves, and also our Life Takers. And they're great. So what they do is an unmodified roll of a 6 to save. And the reason that I emphasize the word unmodified is you could fight something that has rend 1000, right? You roll your dice, you roll a 6, you then apply the modifier to that to say you failed your save. So even if their rend exceeds your save to the point that everyone's going to die, you still roll those dice to proc the 6s, and that's really important in a meta where there's quite a bit of rend 2 damage 2 on the charge, or what's faulty, like rend 7 if he hits a 6 or something silly like that. That then it's this whole pairing thing. So we've got, okay, our Mortek Guard previously did 3.5 wounds to themselves. Let's just say they snuck through 6 wounds. We hit a 6 with one of our Blade Bucklers. All of a sudden, we've done 4.5 mortal wounds to them. They've killed 5 of us. Then we say, do we have Martyr Sacrifice on? Martyr Sacrifice, to me, is a really, really interesting mechanic, because what you do is when a model dies, you measure within 3, and on a 5+ a model within 3 of them suffers a mortal wound. That opens up a whole world of Sisters of Slaughter tech. Sisters of Slaughter, obviously, they pile in 6 inches, And because we've got retreat and charge, you can do some funky stuff where you hit the unit you're already fighting with a retreat and then charge in, and you circle around the back in an effort to get into some shooting or in an effort to get into a support character. And typically, we're then presenting our opponent with one of these choices. Again, there's this dilemma of, do I have my character within 3, so it's -1 to hit from the shooting, from the Shadow Warriors and the Heart Renders and the Avatar on the Cauldron, or do I have it outside of 3 so that they can't pile in around me and then use Martyr's Sacrifice to splash mortal wounds onto me? And this is something I've done quite a bit with Volkite Berserkers, right? Volkite Berserkers, when they charge, you roll a 6 and then you measure the number, you roll a dice, and on the roll of a 6, it does a mortal wound, but you measure like the number of models within 8, so you can actually throw your shield at characters that are hiding behind the unit you're charging into. You kill the character, and that obviously is fantastic for that unit, and it works really well in this army. So we'll just go back to our example. 10 more Tech Guard. We're choosing for illustrative purposes to make this list look strong, so we're not going to talk about the more Tech Guard having +1 from Catacross or reroll ones from the spell or anything like that. I understand buffs exist both ways, but 10 more Tech Guard. You've set this up so that the fight is on your terms. They've done 3.5 mortal wounds to themselves using the command ability. The Blade of Bucklers, you've got lucky. You've splashed 2 of them, right? You've still taken 6 wounds. A third of those, an additional 2, are going to bounce back as mortals. So that they end up say killing 4 or 5 models, but in return, before you've even attacked, they've taken 7 mortals. And for a unit that has, maybe a 3+ rerollable save, you're going to take that any day of the week, aren't you? 7 mortals is fantastic. So some of the other things to be aware of in terms of the Blade Bucklers, just that it's melee, and it's worth emphasizing that because it's not the combat phase, it's melee. So things like Nighthaunt, they hit a charge, and Nighthaunt hate mortal wounds. As someone that plays death quite a bit, things like Chain Rasps that do a high volume of attacks hate anything with rebounding wounds. You end up killing a mountain of Chain Rasps. So Nighthaunt, Auric Warclans, they fight in the hero phase, obviously. Daughters of Khaine in the mirror. So this particular army, talking about utility again, I've included a slaughter queen over a hag on foot, and the reason for that is that she gives us the option to fight in the hero phase. Your army is not designed around fighting in the hero phase. The army doesn't rely on it, but it gives you options. And what we're trying to do is stack the number of favorable options for us and stack the number of options that are poor for our opponent and create disparity between those two things to win the game. So yeah, in the Daughters of Khaine mirror, obviously the Blade of Bucklers are going to work in their hero phase, and their Blades of Khorne, Stormcast as well. There are a number of armies that don't fight exclusively in the melee phase, so in the combat phase with their melee weapons, so that's obviously great. So that's it really. Look, many multiple medium units. It plays differently, to your traditional 2 big blocks. It plays differently to your 12 units of Morsar Guard and 3 units of Aether Wing. I think it could compete with both. I think that the book has enough innate strength, that that's going to carry you a little bit of the way anyway. And I'd love to see this army on the table. It's one that I intend on building. I reckon it's a 4-1 army, and equally I think that you could go 5-0 with this army with a good run. So like anyone that's won an event will tell you that there is an element of luck to getting your 5-0. You need a favourable draw. You need the scenarios to roll your way. But I think this is an army that with practice and well piloted, you could see yourself up on those top tables in the final round, and you're giving yourself a shot. And I mean, that's all you can ask for, isn't it? No one cares, but I'm just going to talk about the hobby project I'd like to do with this army. So the Amazon models that came out for Mordheim, they're awful sculpts. If you have a look at them, they all look like they're standing at a urinal. So it's like 20 women with their legs spread eagled, and well, there's something I didn't think I'd say on the cast. Yeah, I think, look, they're awful, but I'd love to get my hands on 100 of them. I think primarily I'd look to just use the stock model. I'd probably do weapon swaps so that they had the Sisters of Slaughter whips, so it was really obvious who were the Sisters of Slaughter. And then I think I've already got like a stack of Shadow Stalkers here, so I think what I would do is I would merge those two kits, because the way that the old Mordheim sprues work, they're all metal, right, but you get like a number of head options, a number of hand options. It's an army from the Southland, so I'd be looking at getting some skink shields and some, Cold One capes and that sort of stuff. And yeah, if anyone's got 100 of these lying around, I think that they sell for about $20-25 each on eBay. So if anyone wants to give me 100 of them for free, yeah, I'd be accepting of charity. All right, let's do some shout outs. We've just almost hit the 30-minute mark, which is nominally what I'm going to aim for each episode. So this week, I've watched a fair bit of Age of Sigmar content, actually. I'm just so pumped for the Grave Lords, which are coming out, and the new box game Warhammer Quest. That I'm thirsting on content. So I watched the Honest Wargamer and their Age of Sigmar Bad FAQ show. I'd recommend for anyone that's interested in the reasons mechanically it was a poor decision to reduce the number of prayers that the Hag can cast. Go and check that out. And I think I'm not going to harp on it here, but there is a bad faith element to making a change like that. As I said, I personally went out and bought 3 towers and. Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me, I don't know, George Bush.
There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee, that says, fool me once, shame on you. If fool me, we can't get fooled again.
Another thing I watched this week was Sigmar's Order Academy. So this has got a really interesting Phoenix Guard review. I think he's going to work through all of the units. I'll include the link in the show notes. I just wanted to give a shout out to the Sydney Slaughter. I picked up my ticket for the Sydney Slaughter on pre-release because I was going last year. They opened them up early to returning participants. I'm going to take Mixed Death, and he's got Anvils of Apotheosis. So I've built a little program on my phone which calculates Anvil's points and different things, and that was just so much fun for me to get into a little bit of code and do that. And then I've been doing that flat out, so I've got a heap of options. They all seem terrible, but I'm looking forward to teasing that out. And the next shout out I wanted to give was to Sarah Lavender ASMR. So if you're not dedicating at least 15 minutes a day to mindfulness, you're doing yourself a disservice, whether that's meditation, whether that's going for a walk, whether that's having a cup of tea in relative silence. It will do you the world of good. Let me get up on my soapbox and just say, put yourself first, privilege your mental health. And for me, that's about doing meditation every day, or it's about listening to some ASMR in a quiet environment. And it just makes me a happier, more well-rounded person. I love Sarah's work, and she's done one called My Favorite Fantasy Book. She's a big fantasy junkie, so I think that probably would speak to some of the listeners of this show, because obviously it's a genre we're all into as gamers. And just finally, as corny as it sounds to you guys, I'm just overwhelmed. I think at the time of recording, we're up to about 700 views and 120 something subscribers to the channel. I'm blown away. I was expecting, my mum, my dad, my 3 sisters, my dog's account, my son, my partner, that they would all subscribe, and that would be about it. But just blown away by the support, so I really appreciate it. And it's really encouraging for me to go out and try and do some more content, try and improve every time. And if you've got any feedback about this episode or the format or anything at all, I'm all ears. Feel free to ping me a comment, send me an email. I did regrettably rejoin Twitter, so you're welcome to DM me on there or to send me a message. And I guess it just leaves what we're going to tackle next week. So, Lumineth, Realm Lords, first impressions and counterplay. It's going to be an interesting show. I really appreciate the emotional response that the community at large has had to what we've seen so far, and I can see that this impacts people, and I'm going to try and be as balanced and level-headed as I can be. And I've got the benefit of, holding out on my thoughts until I've actually seen the whole book and had a chance to see what other people are able to come up with in terms of that super top tier stuff. But yeah, that should be a good show. And then the week after that, it looks like we'll have the Cursed City scrolls. So I'll be doing Lumineth next week, and then the week after that, I'll be looking at Cursed City in existing Age of Sigmar armies, which I'm really looking forward to. Sitting on about 10,000 points of mixed death, painted up beautifully at the moment. So it'd be lovely to add a few little extra units to that and support characters and stuff and see how that plays.